The morning sun cast long shadows across the steps of the Riverdale County Courthouse. As Eleanor Wright approached the entrance, a worn leather portfolio clutched to her chest. There was nothing remarkable about her appearance. Blonde hair pulled back in a practical, low bun, her youthful face free of makeup, save for perhaps a touch of lip balm, and clothes that spoke of simplicity rather than fashion. A plain beige cardigan covered a modest white blouse paired with faded slacks that had been carefully pressed. Her natural beauty shone through in her clear blue eyes and gentle features, though she seemed unaware of it. A young woman whose quiet grace reflected inner strength rather than vanity. The security checkpoint bustled with the usual morning crowd. Lawyers in tailored suits, clerks rushing with files, witnesses nervously checking watches. Officer James Harmon manned the station, his uniform adorned with pins that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. His eyes narrowed as they landed on Eleanor, something in her simple appearance triggering immediate disdain. "Excuse me," he called out sharply. "You there in the plain cardigan? Step aside." Eleanor looked up, momentarily confused. "Is there a problem, officer?" The way he smirked made her stomach tighten. "Special screening protocol," he announced loudly enough for others to hear. "Can't be too careful these days." She reached into her bag, retrieving her courthouse identification badge. "I work here," she said quietly, extending the credential. Officer Harmon barely glanced at the badge before pocketing it. "Anyone can print something official looking. You think you can just waltz in here dressed like that? This isn't the public library, sweetheart." The young female officer beside him shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent as curious onlookers began to stare. "I need to report to work," Eleanor stated, her voice calm despite her racing heart. "Please return my identification." "You'll follow procedure first," Harmon insisted, his voice hardening. "Come with me now." Before she could protest further, he gripped her arm and steered her away from the main entrance, down a side corridor where the echoes of courthouse activity faded to a distant hum. The door he pushed her through led to a small, windowless room with harsh lighting and a metal table. "This is completely unnecessary," Eleanor stated firmly. "I've worked in this building for years." "Funny," Harmon replied. "I've never seen you before, and I know everyone who matters." He opened a drawer and pulled out a pair of scissors. "That messy bun is a security concern. Could be hiding anything in there." Eleanor's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't be serious. This is a violation of my rights." "Standard procedure for suspicious individuals," he replied with a cold smile. "Sit down." A younger officer pushed her into the chair while an older one stood by the door, arms crossed. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "This will be reported." "Report all you want," Harmon sneered, flicking the scissors open. "No one's going to take the word of someone who looks like they shop at discount stores over officers of the court." The first snip echoed in the small room. Eleanor's carefully maintained bun came undone as locks of blonde hair fell to the floor. She didn't struggle. Her resistance was in her unflinching gaze, in her refusal to give them the satisfaction of her tears. "There," Harmon announced as he finished brushing hair from his uniform. "Now you really look like you don't belong anywhere important." "You've made a grave mistake," Eleanor said quietly as she stood, dignity intact despite her now choppy, uneven hair. "Yeah," Harmon laughed. "People like you always say that. Then walk away with your tail between your legs." He gestured toward the door. "Courtrooms are that way. Try not to get lost among the important people." Eleanor retrieved her badge from his desk without asking permission, tucked it into her portfolio, and walked out with measured steps. Each click of her modest heels against the floor was deliberate, unhurried, and carried the weight of quiet power rather than defeat. They had underestimated her, a mistake they would soon come to regret. The hallway stretched before Eleanor like a gauntlet. Portraits of past judges, all stern-faced men in formal robes, seemed to stare down at her as she passed. Her scalp stung, but she didn't raise a hand to touch the damage. A woman underestimated was often a woman at her most dangerous. Instead, she maintained her measured pace, back straight, eyes forward. Two clerks stood near a water fountain, their conversation halting abruptly as she approached. One looked away immediately, shame coloring his features. The other's eyes widened in shock. They had seen her being led away earlier, had done nothing, and now witnessed the aftermath of that silence. The main corridor leading to courtroom 4 was crowded with attorneys, plaintiffs, defendants, and reporters. A civil rights case against the county had drawn national attention. Allegations of systemic discrimination against lower-income residents in housing and public services. Conversations quieted as Eleanor moved through the crowd. People stepped aside, uncertain whether to acknowledge what they were seeing or pretend not to notice. A woman with a press badge opened her mouth as if to ask a question, then thought better of it. Eleanor paused outside the heavy oak doors of the courtroom. Taking a deep breath, she pushed them open and entered. The courtroom was filled nearly to capacity. Attorneys arranged papers at their tables. Spectators shifted in their seats. Journalists scribbled preliminary notes. The bailiff stood at attention near the judge's bench, which remained empty. All activity ceased as she entered. The rustle of papers stopped. Whispered conversations died mid-sentence. A pen dropped the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. With unwavering steps, Eleanor walked down the center aisle, not toward the gallery or the witness stand or the clerk's desk. She walked directly to the judge's bench. Confusion rippled through the room. A few spectators leaned forward in their seats. An attorney half rose, mouth open as if to object, then slowly sank back down. The silence deepened, charged now with collective disbelief. At the defense table, Officer Harmon stood among other county employees named in the lawsuit. His confident smirk transformed gradually, first to confusion, then to dawning recognition, and finally to horror. The blood drained from his face as understanding crashed over him like a wave. Eleanor reached the bench where a black robe hung neatly on a wooden stand. Without hesitation, she picked it up and with a single fluid motion slipped it over her shoulders. The fabric settled against her frame with quiet authority as she took her seat. The courtroom froze in a tableau of stunned realization. Some faces registered shock, others embarrassment. A few, particularly among the plaintiffs, showed the beginnings of something like vindication. Judge Eleanor Wright, recently appointed to the federal bench, regarded the courtroom with composed dignity, the jagged edges of her newly cut hair visible above the robe's collar. The simple young woman they had dismissed was now the embodiment of judicial authority. "Is the docket ready?" she asked the court clerk, her voice clear and unwavering in the thick silence. The clerk stammered, "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Wright nodded once. "Then we will proceed with case number 327B, allegations of discriminatory practices and civil rights violations." Her gaze swept across the courtroom, lingering for just a moment on Officer Harmon's ashen face. "All parties present." A chorus of affirmations followed, uneven and tentative. Some attorneys exchanged wide-eyed glances. Others stared at their notes, unable to meet her gaze. "Very well," she said. "Let justice be our only concern today." The morning session proceeded with testimony from Martin Geller, a Vietnam veteran who had been denied housing assistance despite meeting all qualifications. Judge Wright listened attentively, taking notes in a small, neat hand. Throughout the testimony, Officer Harmon grew increasingly agitated, his foot tapping nervously against the floor, his fingers drumming on the table. Judge Wright noticed, but gave no indication. After the second witness, she called for a brief recess. As the courtroom emptied, she remained seated. When only her clerk, the bailiff, and Officer Harmon remained, she spoke. Officer Harmon approached the bench. He froze mid-step, the blood draining from his face. After a moment's hesitation, he walked slowly forward, each step heavier than the last. "State your full name for the record," she instructed. "James Harmon," he replied, his voice barely audible. "And your position at this courthouse?" "Head of security, 7 years," he answered, swallowing hard. "Your Honor, I didn't realize that I was a judge," she finished for him. "And if I had been simply another citizen coming to seek justice in these halls." Her voice remained measured, but each word landed with precision. He had no answer. "In your 7 years of service, Officer Harmon, how many complaints have been filed against you for discriminatory treatment?" His eyes darted around the empty courtroom. I don't know exactly." Judge Wright opened a folder on her desk. 16. 16 formal complaints, all dismissed without investigation, all filed by individuals who, in your estimation, didn't look like they belonged in a courthouse. Officer Harmon's hands trembled at his sides. "I was just doing my job." "Security protocol." "There is no security protocol that involves cutting someone's hair." She interrupted, her voice sharp now. "There is no protocol that permits humiliation as a screening technique. What you did was not security. It was abuse of power." She stood imposing despite her modest height. Effective immediately, You are suspended pending a full investigation by the Department of Justice. Your actions this morning will be reviewed as potential civil rights violations. You can't do this, he protested weakly. Actually, she replied, I can, and I will. This courthouse installed a new security system last month. Every room is now monitored, every word, every action recorded. The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. He stumbled back a step. But more importantly, she continued, it isn't just my word. It's the words of 16 other citizens whose complaints you thought would never see the light of day. Citizens who will now have their chance to be heard. She signaled to the bailiff, please escort Officer Harmon out. He is not to return to his post. As he was led away, Judge Wright remained standing, watching him go, with the same steady gaze she had maintained while he cut her hair. There was no triumph in her expression, only resolve, the quiet power of a woman underestimated who refused to let injustice stand. In that moment, the courtroom witnessed the transformation of humiliation into a force for change. 1 month later, Judge Eleanor Wright stood before a packed courtroom, not to hear a case, but to announce what would come to be known as the Wright Reform. Her hair was growing back unevenly, but she made no attempt to hide it. Each morning when she looked in the mirror, it reminded her not of humiliation, but of purpose. This courthouse exists for one purpose only, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room, to ensure that every person who walks through those doors receives equal treatment under the law. Not equal treatment if they wear the right clothes, not equal treatment if they speak with the right accent. Equal treatment, period. She held up the document that would change everything. The Wright Reform is not a suggestion. As of today, it is courthouse policy. She outlined the changes: mandatory bias training for all employees, anonymous reporting channels protected from retaliation, oversight committees that included community members from all backgrounds, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory conduct. From the back of the room, a voice called out, "That's extreme, Your Honor." Sometimes perceptions differ. What one person sees as discrimination, another might see as necessary caution. Eleanor looked directly at the speaker, a senior bailiff. "Discrimination is not a matter of perception," she replied evenly. "It is a matter of action and impact. If your actions disproportionately impact certain groups based on appearance or background, the issue is not with their perception, it is with your conduct." A young security officer raised her hand tentatively. "What about those of us who saw things but didn't speak up? I saw what happened to you, but I stayed silent." Eleanor's expression softened slightly. The reform addresses that too. It establishes protection for whistleblowers, but more importantly, it acknowledges that systemic change requires courage. The courage to speak up when something is wrong, especially when the person committing the wrong holds power. As the meeting dispersed, the young officer, Maria Vasquez, approached Eleanor. "I want to apologize," she said quietly, "for not interfering that day." Eleanor regarded her thoughtfully. "What would have happened if you had?" Maria looked down. "I would have lost my job. I need this job." "Exactly." Eleanor nodded. "The system was designed to keep you silent, to make the cost of speaking truth too high. That's what we're changing." Maria squared her shoulders. "I want to help with the reform." For the first time in days, Eleanor smiled. "Then help us build something that makes silence impossible." 6 months passed. The Wright Reform had been adopted not just in Riverdale County, but in 3 neighboring jurisdictions. The Department of Justice had completed its investigation, resulting in criminal charges against Officer Harmon and administrative actions against officials who had systematically buried complaints. On a crisp morning, Eleanor arrived at the courthouse to find a small gathering on the steps. Unlike the press conferences of months past, this was quieter, more personal. People stood in a loose semicircle, some holding small signs, others simply waiting. An elderly woman stepped forward. Her clothes were worn but clean, her eyes clear behind thick glasses. "Judge Wright," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "We wanted to thank you, not just for what you did about that officer, but for everything that came after." Eleanor looked at the assembled group, people who 6 months ago might have been subjected to the same treatment she had endured. "I just did what needed to be done," she replied simply. A middle-aged man with calloused hands spoke up. "Last week I came here to file paperwork. The officer at the desk called me sir and looked me in the eye. First time that's ever happened." One by one they shared their stories, small but significant changes in how they were treated when seeking justice. Eleanor listened to each one, the weight of what had been accomplished settling around her like a mantle. Later that day, she presided over a routine hearing. As she entered the courtroom, everyone rose without prompting, not out of obligation to her position, but out of respect for what she represented: fairness and justice in their purest forms. Among the observers was Maria Vasquez, now heading the courthouse's newly formed oversight committee. Beside her sat Harmon's replacement, a woman with kind eyes who had been specifically recruited from outside the system. When the day's session ended, Eleanor returned to her chambers and stood by the window. A small plaque had been installed beside her door, not commemorating her specifically, but stating simply, "Justice sees no clothing, hears no accent, and demands no status." That evening, as the courthouse emptied and the halls grew quiet, Eleanor walked through them alone. Not as a judge now, but as a citizen, the way she believed everyone should experience these spaces. She passed the security checkpoint, where it had all begun, now staffed by officers who made eye contact with everyone who entered, who explained procedures clearly, who treated each person with dignity under pressure. She passed the hallway where she had walked with newly shorn hair and unwavering purpose. Now the walls displayed photographs of the community in all its diversity, a visual reminder of who these halls truly served. As she pushed open the heavy doors and stepped into the evening air, Eleanor thought not about what had been accomplished, but about what remained to be done. The path to civil rights reform was long and would outlive her tenure, her reforms, perhaps even her name. But for the first time in months, she felt the weight lift slightly from her shoulders, not because the work was finished, but because it had truly begun. The story of Judge Eleanor Wright would be told as an inspirational true story, not as a tale of revenge, but as a testament to real courage and systematic change. A reminder that true justice required vigilance and the willingness to see beyond appearance to the humanity that lay beneath. For what had begun as one simple woman's humiliation had become a community's awakening. And in that transformation lay the most powerful lesson of all, that courtroom injustice wasn't insurmountable when faced with quiet power and determination. Before driving away, Eleanor paused to look back at the courthouse, its columns glowing in the setting sun. Tomorrow a new day would begin, bringing new challenges, new opportunities to prove that justice could truly be blind to everything except that which mattered, the equal worth of every person who sought its protection. And a simple woman with a powerful position would continue to ensure that this promise was kept, not through force or fear, but through reform, education, and the unwavering belief that systems could change when people refused to accept anything less than fairness for all. As the light faded on that courthouse, a profound truth remained illuminated. Sometimes justice begins not with a gavel, but with someone who refused to lower her gaze. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons about a woman underestimated who showed us all what real courage looks like when standing up for what's right. What moment in this story resonated most with you? Share your thoughts in the comments below.